WNST had this incredible Capital Stanley Cup run and heading off to Vegas here for Game 5 is getting to catch up with some old friends from the Washington media when I don't have to talk Nationals or Redskins or even Wizards with them. It's all Caps all the time, and I run into this guy lots and lots of places. He has been in these press boxes these 30 years in the old Capitol Center press box, which is very reminiscent of my seat in Las Vegas. He is the main sports columnist at the Washington Times. He's also 106.7 The Fan contributor and an adjunct professor because he's one of the smart guys at Georgetown University and getting back on his feet these days. We welcome my main man from D.C., Thom Loverro, host of the podcast Cigars and Curveballs, available on Apple and iTunes and all sorts of places, as well as at Thom Loverro on Twitter. Dude, this is unlikely now, right? I mean, here we are, 3-1 lead. This is when the naysayers would say, this is right when the Capitals break your heart in the Stanley Cup Finals. Hey, they blew a 2-0 lead okay, in the last series, right? So, it's never over till it's over, but it sure feels like it's going to happen, Thom.
Last night, Monday night in the Capital One Arena, there was a point, I think it was after Smith-Pelly scored the third goal, where it seemed like it was the loudest I'd ever heard the building. And it was a moment, at least the way I saw it, where fans suddenly said, it's a 3-0 game, an important playoff game, and we don't have the 0. We have the 3. I think that it just kind of like sunk in all at once, sort of like when Ovechkin looked up to the sky after they finally beat Pittsburgh. I really think last night in the arena there was a sense of this is an unreal reality for us now. This is something we haven't experienced before, but it's really happening. I think that was the atmosphere Monday night.
Well, the chant, and I talked to Boswell on the way into the locker room. I said, I've heard a lot of things. I have never heard a Washington crowd chant, "We want the cup." That's something that is, I've heard Caps, 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 let's go Caps. I've heard every goalie get, razzed. I've heard, ref, you suck. I mean, I've heard all of those chants. I have never heard the chant, "We want the cup, we want the cup." And boy, that sent the hair on the back of your neck and that Unleash the Fury, which may be the final Unleash the Fury. Thom, I don't want to see this thing come back on Sunday night. I mean, I think you start to go down a very slippery slope if you come back on Sunday night and first goal goes behind Hopi 4 minutes into the game. That's when treachery ensues in the history of this franchise. I don't want to say they have to win Thursday night, but it sure would be nice.
Yeah, who needs the heavy lifting of coming back for another game? Let me full disclosure here, Nestor. After Game 1 in Vegas, I wrote a column in the Washington Times and went on 106.7 The Fan, and I said the series was over. They lost it in Game 1, and this was why. They scored 4 goals on the road against the favorite going into the series against Marc-Andre Fleury, and they lost. The Capitals are 34-1 this year when they score 4 goals in regulation. I thought that was a missed opportunity. I thought Vegas looked like the better team, the favored team, which they were going into the series, and I didn't think the Capitals could change that, and they did just that in Game 2. I mean, they took Vegas's offensive flow right out of their game, with their defense. I mean, Vegas can't get to the net like they were in Game 1. And so I declared the series was over and Vegas had won.
Again, you counted the Caps out again, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, I did. And I did so very publicly. So I'm going to be eating for a while, and it's going to be crow.
You didn't offer to, walk to Vegas or anything like that, right?
No. I don't play that game. I don't do that.
It's like me. It's like, I'll hang out with Mike Tomlin, but I am not interested in a bet with you where I wear the Steelers jersey. That's never going to happen, That's just not the way I roll. Thom Loverro joining us here from the Washington Times. Let's just go, one by one through all of this. And I think from a writer's perspective, and I've written books and you've written books, this is its own story, its own narrative. And I know when I went back to the Ravens championship and I started to say, what was the turning point that everything changed? I really think you probably would start with Barry Trotz saying yes to this gig in a lot of ways, and all the other tenets of that, and McPhee leaving and McClellan taking over. But I would begin my book with Barry Trotz taking the job and who he is and where he comes from and the lineage of the organization and how that ties to Dick Patrick, how that ties to the scouting system, how it goes back to the Poyle way, which sort of set the tone for the whole franchise. That's how I would begin this because, to your point, they have dealt with adversity differently, I think, throughout the course of the Trotz administration, but they've also had the best team at various points. They don't have the best team now, but they've had the best coaching, and guys like Kuznetsov and Orlov and Burakovsky getting better, young players getting better, and even Ovechkin, who they're getting the best out of right now, and Oshie, who they're getting the best out of right now, and Hopi, who they're getting the best out of right now, that there's something to be said for the coaching part of this that I don't think any Dale Hunter or Adam Oates or even Boudreau was going to get this level of play out of these guys.
Well, I think, let's remember, I mean, we may think that Barry Trotz has had that kind of impact, but he came here with a playoff record that never went past the second round either in Nashville. I mean, 7 times they made the postseason in Nashville and never made it past the second round, so he carried the same baggage that he inherited when he came here in Washington. And I think it has been an evolving process for him trying to get the locker room that he wanted. I remember asking him last year during the season when he talked about the room, and I asked him, is the room stronger than it was when you got here, meaning the leadership? And he said, yeah, he thought it was, but it obviously still wasn't as strong because they lost to Pittsburgh. I think the key was Barry Trotz going to Russia in the off season. He went to visit his son, who I guess was working over there, and he went and met with Alex Ovechkin. And basically, Barry says that he told Ovechkin, you've got to redefine yourself. Fair or not, there are people out there that are defining your career by what you haven't done, not what you have done, and you don't want that. And I think you see Alex Ovechkin, and I think the gray hairs have something to do with it. The young kids on the roster have something to do with it. I think he decided this year he's going to have to change his game. He wasn't. He's not a bad guy. But he just didn't play. Both sides of the ice, and he would disappear for stretches of time. You don't see that from him this year, and I think he really thought that I don't want my legacy defined by my failures, no matter how great people think I am.
Well, and that's something to be said for the kid that's been fat, he's been drunk, he's been out at 2 o'clock in the morning. He's had no defense at various points, suspect coaching, certainly suspect players around him at various points in goaltending. This is the time where they put it all together, and no disrespect to you for counting them out. I've never counted this group out, and I spent the off seasons. And look, Tommy, you're an old baseball guy. I mean, you do cigars and curveballs out there. I said to Boswell, this really reminds me of the early 80s Orioles, that in 79, they were the better team, didn't get it done. They blew a 3-1 lead. They had to pound sand and eat that for 4 years. The Yankees were a part of it. They had, that's who the Penguins are, right? And then in the end, they managed to pull it together for one last run at the rodeo, and this team really reminds me in that way with the amount of star power, because I think Backstrom will be in the Hall of Fame. I know Ovechkin will be in the Hall of Fame. Hope he's still going to write his ticket at this point, and some others, but this is a pretty talented group. I mean, Kuznetsov's got a whole story to write here as well, the rest of his career. This is a very talented group of players. This is not an accident.
It's interesting. That's really interesting. I always thought that 79 to 83 Orioles team probably felt, even though they won at 83, they should have had more to show for it, and they came close so many years. In 82, the last weekend of the year against Milwaukee, and I could see that analogy.
Well, they got boned in 81. They had the best record, and the strike boned them out of both halves of the playoffs.
Yeah, I know. And in 1980, I think they won over 100 games, but the Yankees won like 103. So I see that analogy. That makes a lot of sense. The one thing is, those Orioles fell off the shelf after 83. I mean, Detroit came on in 84 like gangbusters. I think these Caps are only going to get better. I mean, I don't see a window closing for this team because Kuznetsov is a superstar. I mean, you know, Alan May, the analyst on NBC Washington, says he's the most talented player on the team. And I think he's just elevated Ovechkin's game. And that combination, I think, is going to frighten, opponents in the National Hockey League for a few more years. I think this is the beginning. I think this might be the middle. I don't think it's the end.
Thom Loverro joining us here. He is Cigars and Curveballs. He does that podcast. He's out at the Washington Times, 106.7 The Fan, one of my favorite dudes, even though he likes the Redskins. I don't get along with every. It is fascinating, Tommy, how this thing has now sort of jumped the shark in Baltimore. And you know, because you've been in the press box, I'm literally the only dude from Baltimore who's ever covered the Capitals in 35 years. And,
right.
I'm the only one down there. Now, all of a sudden, my timeline full of Orioles fans who have nothing to watch, quite frankly, at this point, Ravens fans who may be on the fringe or don't like Washington or don't like the Redskins or grew up hating Washington, as I did because of the Redskins getting jammed down our throats and what's going on with Masson and the Orioles and the Nationals. Baltimore has completely adopted this hockey team. The Ravens made the lights red in the stadium all night on Monday night. I got home too late to see it at 1 o'clock in the morning. But, on my timeline, 12 share in Baltimore on Monday night for Game 4. Baltimore's adopted this thing. I think that's part of Harrisburg to Richmond, and I know Ted Leonsis talks about that all the time, but the Hershey Bears and Carlson and Holtby and Beagle and all the guys that have blood on the bricks, Jews and these guys that played up there even recently, there is a corridor now of Caps fans, and I often wonder, like, had Gardner and Langway put one in back in 87, or had maybe they been better during the Kolzig era and won that cup in 98 or 99 or that era, whether it would be different, but this is the birth of a regional franchise now in a sport that's coming on that clearly appeals to millennials and young people in a way that baseball doesn't in my town. This is really an incredible thing, I think, for the next 10 or 15 years if they can cart that cup up and down the strip on Thursday night, Tom.
Ted Leonsis talks about, and you probably won't like this, but Ted Leonsis talks all the time about how this is a super city between Baltimore and Washington. He thinks it's all going to be one big super city at some point. I don't know if the personalities will ever
I agree with that from an
together.
economic standpoint. I don't think there's any doubt about that this will become the next sort of New York, Chicago, L.A. sprawl. This will be the next big place because it'll be all combined. And I think he thinks that will give us an economic power that – and he sees it in China and in other places, and I've seen it travel in the world, that, once you put an area together and you say we're 15 million people, that's different than saying we're a city of 1.5 million,
Yeah. So, I mean, I can see why the Capitals have had the appeal in Baltimore, and you're right, from that corridor from Harrisburg on down, after all, the Nats AA minor league team is in Harrisburg. So there's other connections as well in that area, and plus, who doesn't want to be on the bandwagon of a championship team? There's few and far in between opportunities in the area. I mean, the Ravens with the Super Bowl in 2012 is the last real championship. University of Maryland in 2002. So I mean, everybody wants to be part of a bandwagon championship. So I certainly understand it, and there's nothing wrong with it.
I love your headline, and I know the writers don't write the headlines, but in your Washington Times piece on Tuesday morning, cool, confident Capitals take destiny by the throat. It feels that way, doesn't it? And I know it. Look, you get sucker punched and they lose 4-1 on Thursday night and have to come back and play here. It's wake me up on Friday morning. If I'm not drinking out of the cup with a leopard in my hot tub in Vegas on Friday morning, it could spell trouble. But it did feel that way walking out of the building with the Let's Go Caps chant, and it does feel like it's their destiny, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I don't think Vegas has any answers for again, they can't get to the net like they have all year. You know, they have four lines that come at you in waves, and the Caps have been able to stop that defensively. And I think the better the Capitals play, the better they play. I think that the momentum of their success only fuels them. And the confidence of Braden Holtby back there, let's remember, this playoff started with Philip Grubauer in the net for the first two games against Columbus.
Boy, it'd be a hell of a book, isn't it? Like, if you're writing the whole story of where Ovechkin comes from, where these Swedish kids come from, you know, the fact that the winning goalie was benched to start the play, it's crazy. The Wilson suspension, the injury to Kuznetsov last week to wonder whether he was going to play. Obviously, Backstrom's been playing with one hand for a month. It's quite a tale, right?
Yes. Yeah, yes, it is. And Holtby, you know, I think he's empowered them. It's just like that center who, in basketball, in the old days at least, who you knew would cover you if you took a chance defensively to block a shot. Holtby's play has given confidence to the rest of the team. Ovechkin mentions it all the time. It's great watching Ovechkin, how emotional he is on the ice, and how much, again, there's a sense of relief with Alex Ovechkin. This is one of the greatest, in Washington, we always say, you know, the Mount Rushmore of great athletes would include, obviously, Walter Johnson, Sammy Baugh. Alex Ovechkin is on that now. He's one of the greatest hockey players of his era. We haven't seen an athlete like this in any sport in decades in Washington. Yet, even though he'll be a Hall of Famer, he heard people saying, yeah, but he hasn't won a cup. He hasn't won a cup. However fair that is, that was also going to be part of his legacy. And I think this year he was determined not to let that define him anymore.
By the way, the Bryce Harper thing's fascinating to me. I was out in Vegas last week and saw him up, and I know he's a Vegas kid and all that, but I kind of liken it to, and I'm just thinking out loud, I was on the field in the moments after the Ravens won in Foxborough, and I ran into Adam Jones and Michael Phelps, and they were carting around a We Win thing and championship hats and all that, and I'm thinking to myself, if Adam Jones was wearing a Phillip Rivers jersey and that game was in San Diego because he's a San Diegan, probably would have gone over like a fart in a diver's mask around here. I would think the Bryce Harper thing, that's not a great look for him, honestly. I mean, I know there's passion and all that, but that's a little complex, and I know he sort of has one foot out the door to begin with, like Machado does up here, right?
Yeah, now, the one thing I'll say for him is that he didn't look for attention. He was in a luxury box, and the cameras sought him out. I'll compare this to John Wall when the Cowboys played the Redskins at FedEx Field, not last year, but maybe the year before. And John Wall was on the field for everybody to see on the sideline wearing his Cowboys jersey. You see, that's rubbing salt in the wounds. That's calling attention to yourself. I mean, I don't have any problem with Bryce Harper wearing the Vegas jersey in the building because, again, he wasn't leading the cheers. He wasn't, front and center. He was in a luxury box. He wasn't looking for the attention. Listen, Mike Rizzo, when the Blackhawks played the Capitals in the Winter Classic at Nats Park, Mike Rizzo, a Chicago guy, wore a Chicago Blackhawks jacket to the game. I don't have any problem with guys flying their colors, but just don't rub it in people's faces like John Wall did.
Well, I think Bryce might be getting some rubbing in his face when this is all over with, if it goes in that direction. For the Cup and for what it means, and I guess the big picture, and that's what you're going to try to assess on all of this for D.C., for Baltimore, in the big picture of things. But I guess we've all been so doubtful for so long, and so many things have gone wrong in all of this. It almost feels like, as a Caps fan, you can't picture winning the Cup. It's almost like I've never sort of envisioned it in the whole "we want the Cup" thing. And my wife would attest to this. My best friends would attest. I don't think I really got excited about this until Monday before the game. I was out with my son and his daughter watching Fall Out Boy. I got down to DC at 1:00 on Monday because I just kind of wanted to get there. And once it was 4-0, it was very kind of obvious they were going to win. I just wanted to get on the plane for Vegas. I don't know that as a fan, as a 50-year-old guy, that there's much that can get me sort of lubed up in this way anymore after 2 Raven victories and really no thought that the Orioles are going to do this anytime in my mind's eye that the Capitals are on the edge of this. I think it brings out the kid in all of us, including you, who's chronicled Washington sports all of your life and really haven't had a whole lot of nights where you can walk into the locker room of a championship and say, boy, I saw this whole thing complete, door to door, step to step. You've done that with this franchise.
This is what I was talking about last night, the feeling in the building. I think for the first time, the feeling was in the building was I called an unreal reality. Something that they haven't experienced before, and then all of a sudden it sunk in saying, this is for real. This is really happening. Now, and you mentioned this earlier, they lose Game 5 in Vegas, and you can conjure up the anxiety just like that. You can tap into that Washington Capitals fan anxiety with just one loss. The worst case scenario will be in play because there's just been too many times. The only thing is, I think this is different. All those failures that we're talking about for the most part have happened in the second round of the playoffs. A lot of them against Pittsburgh, but against the Rangers.
Hey, by the way, they collapsed a week and a half ago. They had a 2-0 lead coming home, and I woke up that morning and I said to my wife, I said, they're going to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. 4 days later, they're down 3-2. All things are possible here. Yogi Berra, ain't over, man, right?
I know, but I just have a sense that they think this is different. If they think this is different, that's half the battle. Barry Trotz used a word last night that was interesting. He talked about his team's sense of urgency and how they play. Now, I've been in that locker room for the losses, and I've heard that word urgency used by Caps players to describe how poorly they played and how they had a lack of urgency, and they had no explanation why. And this is year after year. That word kept coming up. And it was interesting that Barry Trotz used it last night to describe how well his team played. Because they've been searching for that sense of urgency for a few years now. And I can remember Nicholas Backstrom, standing in front of him a couple years ago saying, I don't know what's wrong. We don't play with a sense of urgency. Well, they found that. I don't think they're going to lose it.
The word calm was brought up, and I fired the final question at Trotz to say, look, you're about to get on an airplane where you can win the Stanley Cup. You're going to wake up in Las Vegas on the Strip with a 5 o'clock game with a chance to win the Stanley Cup. You've never had one of those mornings, right? And boy, the calm that he has, and this is, I guess, the point in the programming where we talk about his contract, Tommy, and how unorthodox this is, and what a bad scene this is for the franchise, quite frankly. And I don't know that he wants to stick around. I know him better than most know him. I don't know that he's truly happy with the scope of the way things are done there and how the contract thing was done last year. I know there's a lot of speculation amongst the national media that this could be the last run for him, that he would walk away from this. That wouldn't be a good scenario for the franchise, but they put themselves in this position, right?
Yeah. They have. And it's not a good look for the franchise. And who knows what Barry will do. But I think if he's, one thing about Washington, contrary to what Baltimore fans may think, it's a pretty good place to live. I think that once you're here for a while, you kind of like the area. It's got a lot to offer. I think that may come into play. Now, he may not like the things that are done above him, and I'm not even talking about Brian McClellan. I'm talking about Dick Patrick and Ted Leonsis. I always thought that George McPhee had some particular issues with those people above him, particularly when it came to spending money for hiring coaches while he was here. That's the question about Barry Trotz, and he's so relaxed in a way because I remember last year when a post-game press conference after they lost to Pittsburgh, somebody asked him about Alex Ovechkin and his play during the series, and Trotz said, "I really don't want to answer that question right now." He was feeling the pressure of the Caps' failures. And I think he has this sense of relief when he's up there now to be able to talk to the media about successes. That's something new for him.
Thom, I'll leave the Orioles thing for the next time we chat, other than to just give you the open-ended. I mean, you have been as critical of these creeps that have owned this team for 25 years as anyone. You've watched it. You've washed your hands of it and gone and done the Nationals thing, and there's $400 million now of disputed money that anybody with sense, you, me, anybody would have predicted 13 years ago that Angelos was going to tie this thing up the way he has. But now they're the worst team in the sport. They have the most dysfunctional everything ever, including the Machado thing and Brady Anderson running around. I'm going to begin my Dear Orioles takedowns, as we columnists would call it here, in the coming weeks. But do you have anything you want to throw in on the Orioles, looking at it from afar and watching this dumpster fire set to fire here this summer?
I would predict that if Peter Angelos at some point, for whatever reason, steps down or circumstances take hold and he is no longer the owner, that Major League Baseball will force them to sell the team. I don't see them letting the Angelos boys and family continue to run the franchise. How that's going to happen, I don't know. But that's been the sentiment inside baseball for quite a few years. And I think if there's a changing of the guard, the franchise will get sold under pressure from baseball. From
your lips to God's ears. Real ownership in Baltimore. Thom Loverro predicts it, as well as predicting a Stanley Cup. You got any bad news for me here? You're going to predict the Nationals are going to win the World Series? That would be bad news up here.
I got no bad news today, Nestor.
All right. Well, we'll be following you out on Twitter and at the Washington Times, of course. Cigars, curveballs. Great to see you back on your feet again, Tommy Love. Great to have you on the program and bringing your wisdom and your many, many years of Cap suffering right along with me. I hope to see you, and I hope to drink some champagne out of the Stanley Cup with you at some point, my friend.
Okay, Nestor. Great talking to you.
Thom Loverro from the Washington Times. You can find him at Thom Loverro. That Tom has an H. Thom. Loverro, and Cigars and Curveballs is his podcast and can be heard out on iTunes and Apple, as well as through his Twitter feed. And he's been my friend for about 30 years as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper is going to ship at 7 a.m. That's 4 Vegas time. To your email inbox. It's all free of charge and brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com. Also including the Laurel entries for the weekend in the Maryland Jockey Club. They are racing down there this weekend. Go down there and watch Caps. Have some fun. Laurel racetrack underway. We've left Pimlico, and, of course, incredible Triple Crown run for Bob Baffert this week with Justify up in Elmont, New York, and Belmont, where they're apparently going to dig a ditch and build the Islanders a new facility up there just outside of the Belmont track. So more news there as I learn my hockey as I go along. I'll be in Vegas for all things Game 5. You can find me there, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. I'll also be participating in the SSV on WNST around 4:15 on Thursdays pregame. Dennis Kolatzos will be in the cockpit from 3 until 5, doing it for you on Thursday, getting you ready for Game 5 and a potential raising of the Stanley Cup by the Washington Capitals. Pinch me. I just said it. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop pimping the puck and talking Stanley Cup. We are Baltimore Sports and WNST.net.